Hi, I'm Bryce Crittenden.
Hi, I'm Caroline Land, and welcome back to EPL's Overdue Finds.
Hey, Caroline, how's it going today?
Going really well, Bryce. How are you?
Really good, thank you. It's funny, we record this show online. We've been doing this now for like 2 years, since really the beginning of the pandemic, and we use a system called Squadcast, and they are not a sponsor, but
No.
they're very good to work with and allows us to record from our homes and branches and everything. So they changed their format today. So I kind of feel like we were thrown a little bit of a curveball here to start the recording. I'm a little bit shook.
Yeah, that's exactly how I feel. I think we've had that spike of adrenaline to get us going. Luckily we're not live, so
Yeah.
if it takes us a few minutes to get into it. But now I was saying to you just before you hit record that now that I'm used to this change, I can admit that I am liking it. So
Yes,
yeah.
definitely.
And Squadcast has come through for us. I know you said they're not a sponsor. We don't need to talk about this too much, but they have really saved us times in the past when we have lost entire recording tracks.
Yes, they are fantastic. Once again, they're not a sponsor.
Not a
Podcast, if you do
sponsor.
want to sponsor, please. But yeah, there's been times if you are starting your own podcast, it's very handy. And there has been times when we've lost tracks after we've recorded for like an hour, and a simple email helps us fix that. So they've been awesome. But today we're not just talking about Squadcast.
No.
Thankfully.
Yeah.
It's interesting because on our website, we recently released a blog called Favorite Queer Characters. And it's made up of some great picks from EPL staff. And Caroline, much like kind of other previous editions of Overdue Finds, like now I didn't send this call out, but some of my colleagues in marketing did, and they created this list and they reached out to staff and they were like, hey, who are some of your favorite queer characters? We just want to recommend some titles for our great customers. And once again, staff came through with some awesome picks, and I love seeing these lists come out and these picks from staff, because our staff are always very enthusiastic when it comes to these lists, right?
One of the best things about EPL is how we live that vision of we share. That's why we're here. And there are some really great conversations happening among staff, and the items that were listed on this brainstorming post, we knew that we wanted to highlight some of them, to talk to some staff, and to maybe share some titles that some people have heard of and maybe some that they haven't.
Yeah, there was a lot for me I hadn't really heard of. So, we've got a great list there. But today we're going to be talking about that list in general, but we're also going to be talking about some other picks that maybe didn't make it to that list on our website. And even though Pride Month is over, I still think this is a really important conversation that we're having. And these episodes and these lists and stuff shouldn't always just be limited to 1 month. So we've got a couple staff members joining us today. First time guests once again. We're on quite the roll of first time guests, Caroline. I
love it.
Always love having first time guests on Overdue Finds. So a couple of our staff members, they were very enthusiastic, and they mentioned quite a few different characters and titles. So we invited them to come on the show, and we're happy to have them today. So first, I want to welcome to the show. Right now, he is a page at Riverbend branch, my home branch, and he's going to be moving to Millwoods in August. But Levi Hayes, welcome to Overdue Finds. How are you today?
Not too bad.
So our last episode, we also had one of your colleagues from the Riverbend branch on. But I have to ask you, so your page, what does that job entail?
It varies slightly branch to branch. My home branch is actually Meadows. I've been there for 8 years, and I'm at Riverbend temporarily and then hopping over to Millwoods. But in the main, pages are the ones who, when a patron puts an item on hold, we are the ones who will pull it off the shelf and then send it to the branch that they requested it at. And then we will also be on the receiving end to make it available for them and put it out on the shelf. and we might do some shelving, inventory to make sure everything in the collection is where it should be. Any holds that patrons don't pick up after that 7-day allotment time, we will also pull off the shelf to make sure that they are going to the next customer in line or back on shelf where they need to go. And then sometimes there might be like newspaper processing or the incoming new items, but that's kind of branch specific, whether it's a page or a library assistant that does those portion of the jobs.
Nice. Very important role. And yeah, like I've been at the library for quite a while, and I still am learning about the different, of course, I don't work in a branch, but I'm always interested to learn about what everybody does in our branches. So yeah, we're glad to have you today. Also joining us today, they are also a page, but they work at our Abbotsfield branch. Jones Harvey. Jones, welcome to Overdue Finds. How are you today?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing quite well.
Awesome. So Jones, I have to ask you, what is your favorite thing about working at our Abbotsfield branch?
What I really like about the Abbotsfield branch is the area that it's located in. We've got a large sort of catchment, and I like knowing that we're providing resources to people that need it the most. I like knowing that we're providing resources where they're really going to make a difference.
Good stuff. Well, we are very excited to have you both on the show with us today, and I think we're going to get some. I saw some of your picks on the list, and you both had some great suggestions. So I can't wait for you to share them with our listeners today. But before we do that, though, Caroline, we mentioned on every episode of Overdue Finds that we love to hear from our listeners, and they can always email us at podcast@epl.ca. And we recently got an email from a new listener, right?
Yes. It, again, I say this pretty much every time we get an email, made my day. It was great. Loved reading through and hearing their thoughts, both about the episodes they had listened to, but also the topics of Kids in the Hall and our finale episode.
Yeah, so the email actually was, I'll just say his first name, but Kevin, he's actually a listener from Calgary, and he discovered the show on our website, and he listened to, like you said, our Kids in the Hall episode and our best and worst TV endings one. He actually had a really great recommendation after listening to our Kids in the Hall one for Bruce McCulloch's show that he did about 5 or 6 years ago called Young Drunk Punk. It only lasted one season, but yeah, basically it starred him and his wife as parents to kind of a fictionalized younger Bruce, and it was about him growing up in Calgary in the early 80s. Kevin mentioned, he said at the end of the email, thanks for the podcast. It's interesting to have different guests each week. Lots of room for varying perspectives. I'm enjoying it, and we'll have to dig back into the older episodes. So thank you so much for listening to us, Kevin. That's great. And we always love hearing from our listeners too. So if you have any feedback for our show, of course, email us at podcast@epl.ca. So before we get sharing our picks today, let's share some of our own recent Overdue finds that we've been enjoying. Jones, I'm going to start with you. What have you been enjoying lately?
I just finished a documentary called The Secret Mind of Slime, which is about slime molds, specifically the species Fusarium polycephalum, which is nicknamed the Blob after the 50s sci-fi movie. And it's really interesting because its behavior is sort of changing how we're defining intelligence in different creatures. It was super, super interesting. Highly recommend.
Okay, I have so many questions right now. Slime. So this is a living creature?
It's a mold. So it's kind of like a fungus.
Oh,
or
I see.
Yeah.
I got it. Yeah. Okay. Oh, wow.
Yeah, but they can like solve mazes and stuff. So we're kind of like, okay, what? It doesn't have a brain. Is it intelligent? It's very, very interesting.
That is thrilling and terrifying.
Exactly.
I was definitely thinking more of the terrifying part for sure. But are you really into kind of science documentaries and that sort of subject?
I am, specifically with microorganisms. I could absolutely talk your ear off about lichens. They're one of my favorite things. They're a symbiotic relationship. I think it's so cool. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of documentaries in the EPL system about lichens, so I'm going to start requesting like 5 a month until we've got a better collection.
Caroline, when we do our lichen episode of Overdue Finds,
Yes.
Yeah.
we have to have Jones back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it sounds like we should do it sooner rather than later because of all these scientific discoveries. So,
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely.
wow.
No, that sounds really cool. Levi, how about you? What have you been enjoying lately?
I actually just finished a graphic novel. We had the single issues in the system, so I requested the full volume that came out recently. I believe it's called Mamo or Mamo, Mamo, by Sass Millage. It's a children's graphic novel about a town suffering from a curse. One of the residents who's seeking to solve the curse, and the witch that she asks to help her save the town. And it actually ended up being a queer read, which I didn't know until I finished it.
There you go. So is that a fairly new graphic novel collection, or
It was just
has it
added
been?
to the EPL system, I think, like just a couple weeks ago. I requested it, I think, in May. I think it
Nice.
was released as the full collection earlier this year or like last year. It's fairly new.
Nice. So are they still producing or publishing like new issues, or is this kind of like a one and done type collection, or is there new stuff coming out for them?
I think it's just the one volume.
You had me at curse. So
Yeah.
I'll definitely be checking out. I knew I was going to have so many titles to check out after today's episode. I did not anticipate my list would be so long so quickly. So,
Jones, of course, joked about requesting, or wasn't joking, but mentioning, they wanted to have more documentaries about lichens come in. But we mentioned this on the show before. So if there is something that you want to like borrow from us, like read or watch or whatever, we do have a system where you can suggest items for us to purchase to bring into our collection. So we'll have a link to that in today's show notes. But it's a great reminder that if you look and there isn't something in our collection that you wanna borrow, mention it to us. There's a good chance we could bring it in.
Yep.
Caroline, how about you? What have you been enjoying lately?
Bryce, if I said to you Twin Peaks and music, there's probably one name that comes to mind, and that's Angelo Badalamenti. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. That
Absolutely.
was the first name that popped into my head.
Okay, I'm going to talk about the second name that comes to
Oh, okay.
mind, which is Julie Cruz, who is a singer who died early in June of this year. She is featured quite heavily on the Twin Peaks soundtrack and in David Lynch projects. She performed on the show Twin Peaks, the series from 1990, and they would go to the Roadhouse and there would be this like 50s-esque soulful singer. She was kind of responsible for the setting the mood of it. And since she passed away, when she passed away, there were a lot of clips shown on Twitter of how just her music was incorporated into Twin Peaks. I just love listening to her music, period, without all the visuals. And so my overdue find is her album Floating into the Night, which is perfectly named because her music is floaty, it's ethereal, it has a bit of like a 50s vibe, but 50s by way of that 80s and 90s revival of the 1950s.
Mm.
And songs like The World Spins or Rockin' Back Inside My Heart, it doesn't get any better. So Julie Cruz, highly recommend checking out her music, both the stuff featured in Twin Peaks and her original stuff.
It sounds to me, correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds to me like that would almost be kind of like the perfect music just to kind of like, if you're at home just relaxing, maybe you're reading a book, or maybe you're just doing some light work around the house. That, to me, that sounds like the perfect kind of chilling at home music to listen to. Am I right there?
It might be a little too sad to chill
Okay.
to. Like
Yeah.
it could bring the mood down a little bit,
Mm,
but if that's what you're going for, then yeah, I totally recommend it.
sounds like
Yeah.
a good pick. Confession time.
Yeah.
I'm quite aware of its place in pop culture, but I've never actually watched Twin Peaks.
I'm in the same boat as you. I keep meaning to, but I just haven't yet.
There's too much good stuff to watch. I need to watch it.
There's a lot of good stuff. I have a lot of thoughts about Twin Peaks and where it succeeds and where it doesn't. But the music is absolutely, and as much as I was joking about Angelo Badalamenti at the top, hearing David Lynch talk about how music plays a role in the show just underscores the vision and that he had for the series along with Mark Frost. So yeah, I'm
Nice.
always ready to talk about Twin Peaks. So
Sounds
So
good.
when we finally watch it, we know who to go to.
exactly, send you your thought, podcast at epl.ca. Bryce, what have you been enjoying then if you're not watching Twin Peaks?
Quite a bit lately. Caroline, a few times on the show, I've talked about like if we talked about doing like maybe an 80s episode
Yeah.
of the show, and I'm always looking for an excuse to talk about one of my all-time favorite movies.
Mac
That's
and Me.
1980s.
Is it Mac and
Almost.
Me? Oh,
Same year, I believe. Close, second place. But it's 1987's RoboCop, and this is like one of my all-time favorite movies. Like if I'm creating a top 10 list, RoboCop is probably 10 or 9 on that list. But recently, I went to the theater because they were showing a director's cut of the movie, and I noticed we actually have that same director's cut on Blu-ray in our collection. We also have the regular version on DVD, so you can borrow that from us. But if you've never seen this piece of 80s sci-fi futuristic cheese, you are missing out. So what I love about RoboCop is it's set in, like, let me use air quotations, the future. And so of course the future is like the late 90s setting for this movie, but it takes place in Detroit, which has become a lawless mess thanks to police being run by a corporation called OCP. Peter Weller stars as an officer named Murphy, who is killed and then turned into the newest advancement in law enforcement called RoboCop. He's part man, part machine, all cop. And we also have one of my favorite on-screen villains. People talk about like their favorite villains of all time. This name never gets brought up, but it should be Clarence Boddicker, who's played by Kurtwood Smith, who most people know as Red Foreman from that 70s show. He's fantastic. He's scary. He's funny. He's great. But this is kind of some over-the-top violent fun. It's directed by Paul Verhoeven. Who I could probably do a whole episode on, just talking about his great movies like that, Total Recall, Starship Troopers, Basic Instinct. One of my all-time favorite directors as well. So this is a movie that if maybe you haven't watched it in a while, or maybe you're younger and you've heard of it, please go watch RoboCop. It's fun.
Bryce, I have never seen RoboCop.
Oh, Caroline.
This is why I honestly have not. I'm not even doing a bit right now. Yeah, no. This is why I think we need to do that episode where I choose for you and you choose for me. And
definitely. Yeah. Have I ever told so Peter Weller, of course, stars in RoboCop. Have I ever told you my story about when I met Peter Weller?
I think you're going to right now, please.
A few years ago, Cheryl and I go to the Calgary Comic Expo. And one of the main reasons I went was because Peter Weller was there. So I'm like, oh my God, yes, I'm going to get this RoboCop movie poster signed by him. And I'm so excited to meet him. And Peter Weller, like you wouldn't know it by watching RoboCop, but like he's a very intense person. And so I'm starting to get a little nervous, paid my money. Of course, I'm going to get my RoboCop movie poster signed by him. And I'm trying to think of something like somewhat intelligent to say to him besides like, oh, I love RoboCop.
You're
but
great.
You're great. I loved you in that movie. So I was like, oh, hey, because there was also like a very short-lived RoboCop cartoon series. For some reason in the early 90s, they felt like they could adapt like hard R-rated movies into cartoons for kids, so that we also had like a Rambo cartoon series around the same time too. So anyway, I was just, he's about to sign my poster and I'm trying to sound intelligent. And I'm just like, hey, I was just wondering what your thoughts were on the RoboCop cartoon series. It just seemed kind of funny that you have this very violent R-rated movie turned into a cartoon series. And he was like, he stopped, he looked at me and he's like, there's no cartoon series. And like all of a sudden I'm like, wait, like, am I making this up? I was like, no, I'm pretty sure it was very short lived. He's like, I'm pretty sure there was no cartoon series. And so he was just like dead serious with me. And I was like, okay, like,
he just shut you down immediately.
He just shut me down. So I'm not sure. Maybe he made a call to his agent afterwards and was like, I was supposed to get royalties from that. Why am I just hearing about this RoboCop cartoon series now? But very intimidating, but really cool still to meet him.
I'm like just so tense just from hearing that story.
Yeah. He was just like, there was no cartoon series. I'm like, but there was. It only ran for like 10 episodes, but I swear to God, I'm not making this up, Peter Weller.
I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't lie to you.
No, not at all. Not at all. So, if any of our listeners get a chance to meet Peter Weller, do not ask him about the RoboCop cartoon series. Does not care for it, apparently. So, all right. But today we're not talking about RoboCop.
No.
So at the start of the show, we talked a little bit about the list of favorite queer characters that staff recommended, and I can't wait to talk some more about some of these characters and items that staff recommended. But before we get into that, though, I want to ask Levi. I'm going to start with you on this one. What do you think makes a great character, really, in a book or movie? And is there anything different for something that might make a great queer character?
For me, regardless of the format, whether that's a book or a movie, I personally don't need to like the character to enjoy them. And in fact, I often enjoy the anti-heroes and the villains more than the good guys. But they do need to be relatable in some way. You need a reason to be on their side in support of their goals, and that way, when they encounter barriers, you feel the frustration and upset that they do, and you root for them to overcome those barriers. I find another necessity is a character arc. Whatever flaw or weakness the character begins the story with, they must overcome or at least make progress on it by the end. Character arc can make the difference between reading and watching something just because it has a good plot, so it's entertaining, and reading or watching something because you are actually invested in what happens to the characters as much as if they were real people. And I find the latter are the stories that tend to stay with me. For queer characters specifically, I find realism is the biggest one. Cisgender, heterosexual authors or cishet authors writing queer characters is always a risk because they don't have the lived experience of being queer. That said, many authors do a good job, and I think it is important for them to write queer stories because it will bring those stories and characters to a primarily cishet audience. But for me personally, what makes a great queer character and story is actually not treating them any differently than a cisgender heterosexual character. I like stories where characters kind of happen to be queer, normalizing that queerness rather than stories centered around coming out. Coming out stories are needed, and especially for teens when figuring out your identity is very big. But queer folks do more than come out, and many of us would live or like to live lives no different than everybody else.
Yeah, it seems like we're seeing kind of a lot, and thankfully, a lot more in like in entertainment anyway, about, when there is a queer character, there isn't like, I think they are starting to get a little bit better with just kind of maybe normalizing it a little bit more, and like not having like some, like a tragic, like you said, coming out story or something along those lines. So yeah, it does seems like we're hopefully getting there a little bit more. But Jones, how about you?
I want to touch on what Levi said about at the end there about realistic stories that aren't necessarily just coming out stories. I also had a read a little bit ago that also turned out to be a queer read after I picked it up, and that's happening to me more and more, and I'm really enjoying it. It seems like we're sort of moving forward in terms of the media that's being created and representing us, which is really wonderful. We're sort of moving beyond that series of published work that's sort of just like when we first had things like Brokeback Mountain, they were really necessary in what they did, but then we sort of moved on to more like coming out stories, more like delving in a little deeper, and now we're having stories that feel like real, actual queer characters just living a life. And it's really wonderful to see, and I totally agree that as those stories become more and more prevalent, it's really nice to see them, and I'm really glad that we're getting more of them as they're coming out. Um, for me, I read a lot of nonfiction, so when I read a lot of fiction, I find that very multidimensional and fleshed out characters are very important to me, like making them feel real and giving them flaws and letting them be whole and entire and giving them so many different character aspects. And I think that in terms of queer characters, it's really easy to sort of flatten them to just one facet of their identity. And I think that can happen to any character as well, becoming like a caricature of just one facet. Like if you have a narrative foil, sort of reducing them just to that. But I think it's very important that characters are given an entire life and an entire narrative of their own, not just reducing them to their narrative purpose.
I think that there's such value in having that specificity, and I think there was a period of time where characters had to do so much heavy lifting.
Mhm.
They had to be everything to everyone and maybe couldn't have flaws or make decisions that weren't correct 100% of the time. And by showing that individual aspect of characters, I think that in a way it it makes them maybe less directly relatable, but more like people or have seen or have in your life.
Mhm.
I think another, like, the picking up on the idea of you don't need to like them. One thing that's, I think, for any character for me is them having a clear motivation. And maybe I might not agree with what they are or why they are doing something, but having that kind of internal logical consistency that still allows for them to change and grow and learn and develop as the story goes on, as that arc plays out, for sure. But having um that that sense that the author or director or writer or whoever it is knows who that character is and with actors too, a good actor can go a long way in creating that, even if maybe the writing isn't there 100% of the time. So let's dive deeper in and start with some books. Who are some of your favorite book characters and why? Jones, I'll start with you this time.
This one was a little difficult to me because, like I mentioned, I read a lot of nonfiction. And so going back and trying to remember, like, okay, what are the fiction books that I've read? Um, but I read a lot of graphic novels. And so I landed on a character in Alison Bechdel's long-running comic series, Dykes to Watch Out For, which I really enjoy for the way that it portrayed the community over time, because the series ran from 1983 to 2008, and it was really, really interesting to see how it changed over time. And so I landed on, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, it was Lois McGiver, who did a lot in terms of navigating gender within the comic. It started out displaying a lot of lesbian communities in the comic, or one specific lesbian community. And Lois was introduced as a drag king, and Lois had a lot of friends who had varying gender identities, and it was really well portrayed how people reacted to Lois and to Lois's friends. And as the comic went on, they ended up becoming a mentor to a younger genderqueer character whose name I can't remember right now. And it was handled really well, and I really enjoyed it. And seeing the way that the general reaction to these characters changed over time was really, really interesting, and I really enjoyed how Allison did it. It was very, very fun.
Yeah, no, I'm just kind of taking that in because just thinking of what you can do with a character over that space and time, because thinking of just the world changing from 1983 to 2008, was
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Or like that's
Wow. It's a
that's
huge span. Like,
yeah. And being able to kind of see something play out over time is something that is a great use for that particular media. Yeah, Levi, how about you?
I have a few. My first one would be Vida from a graphic novel series called Crowded. I haven't actually finished it, but from the volumes that I have read, she's a bodyguard for hire in a universe where you can put a bounty on literally anyone. Kind of basically, you put a name on the internet and it's basically crowdfunded like Kickstarter to raise the money to get them killed by people. It's really weird, but also really interesting how it was done. And Vida she has a very particular system. So in this world, she's one of the lowest rated bodyguards, but has like the most surviving clients. So the person who hires her, Charlie, has no idea what she's done to get this hit out on her, and it just grows like exponentially fast, and they have no idea why, and more people are going after her. And Vida is trying to protect her, and Charlie keeps going and like ditching her in the middle of the night and just doing really bad things, putting herself at risk, and it just frustrates Vida to no end, of course. But Vida is forced to be more proactive in protecting her, and I really enjoy the bickering dynamic and the total opposite personalities. It reminded me a lot of Hobbs and Shaw, actually, from the Fast and Furious universe, and how they basically spend the whole time just hating each other, but you know it's going to build into like a camaraderie eventually, and in this case, a relationship eventually. And I also really enjoyed the artist who did the comic because the facial expressions and body language are some of the most expressive I have ever seen. And I read a ridiculous amount of graphic novels every year. And this one is by far one of my favorites specifically for the art. Another one is Danny Tozer from the books Dreadnought and Sovereign by April Daniels. There should be a third one coming out at some point. I think she's still working on actually writing it. But the book is basically about transgender superheroes, and really, do I need to say more than that? I picked up this book because transgender superheroes, and as a trans person, I was like, this is the best representation that you could possibly make. And I liked the first book in particular because it balances the experiences of transphobia with the whole superhero thing. So it's not a book about a trans person who happens to be a superhero. It's a book about a superhero who happens to be trans. So they put the emphasis in the right place. And for a teen book, that was really refreshing. And I find that Dani grows more confident in herself as she learns how to go through the world with both her new gender and her new powers. And she faces foes, both super and completely human, along the way. And that balance and the fight scenes also were done very well. And I think Jones can maybe talk about this one as well, but I nominated the entire cast from the graphic novel Dungeon Critters because they are just, the dynamic between them all is amazing. It's like a turtle, a frog, a cat, and a dog, and not a single one of them is straight. Every single one of them is queer in one way or another, and the art is ridiculously adorable. It's essentially just a super queer D&D story, and the character arts for each teammate and the group as a whole and just all those shenanigans to keep you entertained as you go was amazing. And it's really hard to pick one character because it's really the team dynamic as a whole that like makes the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can absolutely attest to that. It's a super, super fun read. It's a super cute read. It's a children's graphic novel, so it's just goofy and fun and enjoyable. And there was not like a single page where I wasn't, okay, maybe like the climax, but there wasn't a single page where I wasn't like smiling. I think one of my favorite characters, I cannot remember his name, but it's the snake. And he's got like a faraway boyfriend that's a horse, and he's so like soft spoken. He's a man of few words, but there's a couple scenes where he's just like thinking about his boyfriend, and it's like a dramatic like overshot scene. It's very well done. I think it's super cute.
I think his name is Goro, I believe.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Those all sound great. Like Caroline, you mentioned it. We've got a long list already.
Yes.
Yeah, I think my graphic novels list for this summer is getting quite long now.
They're very quick to read.
That one though, I like the point that you made around like the entire cast, and that was something that, as someone who has watched a fair amount of television, a fair amount of movies, although not RoboCop, but for many of them have, if there was representation, it was a character. It was one person. And one of the criticisms that I think I'm hearing now that we're looking back on television and books and movies is that that's not necessarily accurate, and it really limits the diversity of being able to represent a community of people, or people who found community with each other. And so having more than one character who is not cis het is a way to really show people as individuals who can then be different things, and they can have similarities but also differences.
Caroline, so did you have a favorite book character?
I don't. One of the books that I know I've talked about on the podcast before was a book that was quite popular with the romance fans of Red, White, and Royal Blue, which was a romance featuring the son of the U.S. president and the grandson of the Queen of England meeting each other, realizing they hate each other, but very quickly that's really because they are attracted to each other. And I love the space that the characters are given to play in, and also that there is a part of a coming out narrative in the story, but for the most part, the drama around it centers around not who they are from their sexuality point of view, but the fact that my mom is the president and your grandmother's the queen, and like that's enough drama, right? Like that's you can mine a lot of that. But again, characters who have personalities, who make choices again that I don't always agree with. I don't know why people are always trying to ditch their Secret Service or protective agents. Just be safe out there. But if you were living under that magnifying glass, you'd also want to have your privacy. But so this Casey McQuiston is the author, and I believe there's going to be a movie coming at some point around Red, White, and Royal Blue.
Nice. I remember when you first recommended that book on the show, and it seemed like after that, is like if I went into Chapters or Indigo or anything like that, like I would just see that book cover absolutely everywhere. So yeah, definitely not surprised that it's being turned into a movie. So we love movies on this podcast, so we definitely have to talk about some characters from movies and TV. Levi, who are some of your favorite on-screen characters?
I have a few, and again, a lot of them are like the relationship dynamic between multiple characters. On the softer side are Benny and Christopher from the movie Akron. Their relationship is so heartwarming, and there's no real like homophobic elements in the movie that they're fighting against, which was really refreshing. Instead, they share a past trauma, and they have to decide if they can be together or not because of it. And the actors do an amazing job making you feel for both characters who kind of stand on either side of the argument, so to speak, and you root for them to come out the other side all the stronger for it, and preferably together. I also really liked Jules and Jackie from What Keeps You Alive. I'm a bit of a horror fan, so this movie, because just by the fact that it was queer, was perfect. I do think most people would be on Jules' side because she does end up the victim, though she is very resourceful and determined to survive, compared to some movies where the victim just runs away screaming the whole time or ends up being saved by someone else. But I personally liked Jackie, a very decent representation as far as psychopathy goes, and it was refreshing to see a horror thriller movie normally reserved for male slashers and helpless female victims, even the playing field a bit with the queer pairing. The actors do a very good job of getting you to feel for both of them and their relationship in the beginning, and then progressively fear more and more for Jules as the movie progresses. And I also voted for Bex from Assassination Nation, which I believe someone else also recommended for the list. This one is especially important because not only is she accepted by her direct friends group, most of the other people in the community also treat her as just one of the girls. And very importantly, she is a trans character and is played by a trans actress.
I'm fighting so hard to ask whether Benny and Christopher end up together. I am going to have to put that on hold right away.
You will have to watch it.
Jones, how about you?
This one I don't have like a long analysis or a long thing about. It's Ennis Delmar from Brokeback Mountain. He's got a hold on my brain and he will not let go. And I don't know what it is about him. I just can't stop thinking about him. I love him with all of my heart. Ennis Delmar, I love him. Also, like, Brokeback Mountain was amazing for what it did, and it's a really well done movie, and it holds up to the test of time. But, like, I don't know, man. There's this one shot of Ennis Delmar just like sitting down, and he's all like tucked up into his jacket, holding like a little enamel cup, and that like frame just rotates in my brain. So I don't know. Ennis Delmar.
Ennis is the character played by Heath Ledger.
Yes, correct.
Right?
Yeah.
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 He is wonderful. I love him.
That's if I had to make a list of like what I would consider to be like the saddest movies of all time, like that has to be like top
Absolutely.
top 3. I'm pretty good. Like I could probably name the movies over time that have made me tear up. Normally I'm pretty good, but I will honestly admit, like, that's one where at the end I was kind of like wiping them away. Like it's a beautiful movie, very, very tragic. And it's a movie that, I didn't think I would like, being a straight guy, at first I was like, I really don't, I probably won't want to watch that, but ended up really enjoying it. And it's an amazing film, and it shouldn't stop anybody from watching it.
Yeah, it's really well done. I recommend it to everyone I come across, and sometimes I even force them to sit down and watch it with me.
Nice. Caroline, how about you?
Two characters that are very different, but I'm going to start with the first one, which is who is part of a tradition of characters maybe not being identified directly, but viewers or watchers kind of holding on to crumbs and making up perhaps their own explanations of things. And I read Data from Star Trek The Next Generation as a queer character. Asexuality spectrum in particular. And I think that allows for a really interesting reading of his journey to understanding humanity and understanding what it is like to be human. There is a whole episode where he just learns about what being in a relationship with with a woman is like. And he writes scripts for it. He takes his uh cues from uh popular culture, like the honey I'm home type of approach of what it means when you return and someone's waiting for you at home, uh, because it's not something he feels or understands or has experience with. And so Data never really, I mean, he's also an android. Like, we have to say that too. And never I called asexual or demisexual or anything on that spectrum, but I absolutely read him as a queer character.
It's really interesting that you bring that up because I've always read his relationship with Geordie LaForge as very, not necessarily romantic, but definitely queer in its intentions. So I really like that you brought that up, but you also brought up your own interpretation of it that I hadn't read into it before, but like adds so many layers to that character. I love that.
The Data Geordie relationship is such an interesting one. I just love the way that they play out. And there's an episode, I can't remember why the ship is in danger specifically in this one episode, but Data and Geordie are in a shuttle trying to I think there's a wormhole involved. Anyway, the punchline is around, like, we might be stuck with each other for like hundreds of years, and Geordie is just like, oh, and Data's just, going about his business. Anyway, I love Data. And then on the other, if anyone else wants to dispute my Data or anything like that, I am open to that. But on the other end of uh, a character who's not specifically identified as that, not called that, not necessarily portrayed, is David from Schitt's Creek, who I mean, I have seen in my own life. My mom, I've talked about her on the show, huge fan of Schitt's Creek, and in conversations where my sister has been like, we're talking, and the pansexuality comes up, and my sister is like, do you know what we're, and mom can rattle off a definition because of David from Schitt's Creek and how he has explained his sexuality, and the famous scene of the wine, not the label, and making who he is understandable in that way has had a huge impact, I think, on uh, a general audience, mainstream, many people who would fall under that cishet um, label in there. So, yeah, David is, and just the way the relationship he is allowed to have in a TV show, just is was nice to see.
Yeah, I remember that wine scene, and I think it's very early on. It might be like the second or third episode in the whole series, and yeah, it's so perfect with him explaining his sexuality, and how I know for some people it might be like, for myself, I remember hearing about the term pansexual, not necessarily really knowing what it meant, but that scene just kind of describes it absolutely perfectly.
Yeah, and now, like, my mom understanding and being like, "Oh yeah, no, that Emily Hampshire who plays Stevie on Schitt's Creek, she's pansexual," and it's like she knows that because she's watched all these videos and read all these articles because she just loves Schitt's Creek that much. So yeah,
Nice.
If I can really quickly bring it back to that Data conversation, it made me think of a
please.
poem that I read a long time ago, and I just tried very hard to find it again, and it was never published, but it was posted on Tumblr like years and years ago, and I actually read it out loud for a class one time, and it's about, I think it's called "You're Asexual, but Sex is What Makes Us Human," and it's a very long poem about all of the things that do make us human, such as a French soldier who is sending in work via mail and is posthumously awarded a degree even after he's passed away in the war. It's about folks helping each other and nurses and someone who's been in an accident and all of these wonderful things about human beings, but the retaliation of sex being what makes us human that is commonly thrown at people who are asexual. And it just made me think of that. And so I can send you that poem, Carolyn, but unfortunately it doesn't have a title for me to tell people. I think it's called You're Asexual, but Sex is What Makes Us Human, and it was posted by Tumblr user Mumblytron. So I can send a link, but I can't give you a real title, unfortunately.
No, that would be great. That would be, and I think, just the way that Data is trying to understand humanity and how he goes about it. And it's, it's almost cliche to be like, to have, I'm certain there's a scene where characters be like, in many ways he's more human than any of us, type of thing, with his desire to understand. And then, now I'm attributing, desire to an android, and is that really what it is? And Data is an interesting character anyway, and his like characterization around kind of like what's really going on with his processing and all of that. But I like thinking about some of these characters that maybe aired at either a different time. I mean, thinking again, this is closer to that 1983 end of the 83 to 2008 period that we were talking about earlier. And kind of seeing what characters or types of characters may exist in over history, but the value now in being able to see it and name it and have
Explicit.
just that clarity that like this is who I am, this is what you see, this is what I'm experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
Couple of characters I just want to give a quick shout out to in this category. Has anyone here watched the animated series The Great North?
Yes.
So it's from the same really producers as Bob's Burgers, so it has the very same animation style. I'm pretty sure it's set in the same universe too, by the way. But if for those who might not be familiar with that show, it's an anime show about a family who lives in Alaska. It's a single dad, and he's got 4 kids, and one of his sons is his name is Ham Tobin, and he's a teenager. He's a gay character, and it's really cool because he has this very masculine dad who's a fisherman and everything. But what's really cool about it is like, yeah, we know the character is gay, but it's like his family is just very cool with it, and it's not like
it's a non-issue.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. And actually, it's funny because his family is like so accepting of him. There was an episode earlier this past season about he's kind of like, I don't want to say he's sad, but he's almost kind of like he doesn't really have a great coming out story. Like when he told his family that he was coming out, it was like, oh, cool. Like, we're happy for you. We love you. And that's good. And that it was just such a non-issue. And he was trying to create this like big coming out story, and they find this like long lost relative, and she's essentially turns out she's a criminal and is a total jerk. But I just kind of, the family's just very accepting, and I love the show, and the character of Ham is great. And another one too, actually, a staff member brought this up, and I believe it's on the list. So it's from Ariana Biasini. So she brings up the TV show Chucky. Now, this is a show actually I watched when it first came on TV, and there's 2 teenagers in it. So Jake and Devin, and they're both gay characters. Now, what's kind of funny about this character of Jake, though, is that Chucky is kind of attached to this kid, Jake. And of course, because it's Chucky and Child's Play, all these evil things are happening. Jake is kind of struggling with his sexuality, of course, being in high school, and, he wants to be accepted, and, he's really struggling with that. And he comes out to Chucky, and, he says he's gay, and Chucky just kind of sits there on the bed and kind of looks at him, and Jake's like, don't you have like a problem with this at all? And he just blankly, Chucky, this killer doll, just blankly looks at him and just says, Jake, I'm not a monster. So, Chucky, the killer doll, is cool with this character. And it's funny. It's actually not a bad series. I really like the first half of it. The second half goes a little off the rails, but if you're a fan of the character, check out that series anyway.
Well, we can't call creators or artists fictional characters. There are many people whose nonfiction work includes them in some way, including documentaries, memoir, music. Are there any people who stand out to you for their work in this area? Jones, you mentioned you read a lot of nonfiction. Wondering, any names come out to you in this area?
I actually have a very long answer to this question. I really want to shout out the work of Ivan Coyote, Alison Bechtel, and Glennon Doyle, but specifically Ivan Coyote, who is a Canadian author. They're from the Yukon originally, and they moved down to Vancouver. They're a traveling storyteller, and they've released so many books, and I highly recommend that you check out their work. But Ivan's work came to me at a very pivotal time for me. I was sort of reclassifying a gender identity that I had sort of abandoned a long time ago, and was sort of picking up the pieces from. And it was the work of lesbian authors, butch lesbians specifically, that really gave me comfort in that these feelings had been experienced before. There were words and there were communities for these things that I had experienced. And here I really, really, really want to credit the book Gender, A Graphic Guide by Meg John Barker and Jules Scheel, because this book blew my perception of gender completely out of the water. It's an examination of Western ideas of gender and how they are performed, how they are perceived, and how they are dismantled. And it's really, really well done. They have a million other sources within them that you can look at for continued reading. But I have recommended this book to every single person that I can even think of. It totally blew my socks off, and I cannot stop recommending it. I slap a staff pick sticker on it every time I see it. It's Gender, A Graphic Guide by Meg John Barker and Jules Scheel. I highly, highly recommend that you pick it up today. But it was that book, and it was the work of butch lesbians writing about their own experiences and how they experience gender, especially throughout time. There are Ivan touches on this in their work, but queer folks have a lack of elders because of the AIDS crisis and because of persecution and our lifespans just generally being shorter. But Ivan and Allison, I believe, are both in their 50s now. And so those are sort of queer elders to me, in that their work spanned a really long time and gave me stories to give me hope for the mistakes that I had made and the mistakes that I was going to make in the future. And it was really a comfortable place to it was wonderful reading and comfortable stories for me to take comfort in. But I highly recommend the work of Ivan Coyote. They just came out with a new book called Care Of, which is composed of letters that they received throughout the years in their career as a traveling storyteller from other queer folk, and all of the answers to those letters that they had never had time to write until the COVID-19 pandemic. And that book will make you cry. It will absolutely have a story for you. It's amazing, and I highly recommend their work.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. Levi, how about you?
I'm definitely very curious about Gender, A Graphic Guide. I saw your recommendation of it online. I have it at home right now because we had a copy on shelf at Riverbend, so I grabbed it, and I'm hoping to start it very soon. But for stuff that I have seen, I would definitely recommend Kobe from the documentary Kobe, which is a documentary that follows Kobe's gender transition and how it affects the lives of those around him. Through the entire thing, he is very open with his thoughts and experiences. And as a trans masc person myself, it was very validating. I came across this documentary a few years ago, and I originally transitioned in like 2014. So it's been a while, but it took me quite a few years to kind of figure out how to explain things to other people and to be comfortable in my identity. And I came across this documentary at just the perfect time to share it, especially with my family, but pretty much anyone who would give me the time of day. Like, you need to watch this because it explains so many things that I can't put into words, and probably therefore other people can't put into words, and explains it in a way that makes sense regardless of how you identify. And I also wanted to recommend the poetry of Andrea Gibson. I have to say, I am not generally a poetry reader. I normally really don't like it, but I had to pick a book of poetry to read for a university class, and I came across this poet because they were listed as a queer poet, and I picked up the collection Lord of the Butterflies, and it just blew my mind. Like, they are primarily a spoken word poet, so I really liked their work because it's very easily accessible. It's not dense. There's not really like big words. It's not big about kind of the on-page imagery. It's about evoking the emotion more so. And in the particular collection, Lord of the Butterflies, they talk about gender, sexuality, romance, loss, family, both personal and vicarious. And they talk about really intense topics like the Orlando nightclub shooting, the death of people who are very close to you and who mean a lot to you. And by writing these things through a queer lens, writing about queer specific experiences, and writing them in that very accessible way, I felt entirely validated by this collection from the first page to the last, even in experiences that I have not personally had. And I really enjoyed being able to read it because you can listen to a lot of the performances on YouTube or on their Instagram, but when you read it, there are stanza breaks that they don't say verbally. So you get kind of this double extra meaning of where they've decided to break the lines on the page that just adds such an amount of depth you don't get if you only listen to it spoken, which I really liked.
I also have a poetry collection I want to recommend. It's called We Want It All, and it's a collection of radical trans poetry. And I got maybe a quarter of the way through it before I had to return it, but I'm absolutely going to pick it up again. And it's a very large number of poets. So if you read poetry, I think you might enjoy it.
Very responsible staff member. Your book was due and you returned it. So I'd love to hear that.
I can't say that I was the same when I was a student page.
No.
Bryce, did you have any?
Yeah, there's actually a documentary, and it was almost an overdue find pick for me a while ago after I watched it. It's a documentary. It's called Scream Queen: My Nightmare on Elm Street. So the documentary actually is about actor Mark Patton, and he starred in the mid '80s in. He starred in Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. So this movie, for those who might not have seen it before, it's kind of like an infamous sequel in the series of Nightmare on Elm Street, because normally in a lot of these horror movies, we do have kind of a female protagonist. So this one, we have a male protagonist. And it's funny because, like, I watched this movie, I think, as a teenager, and didn't really think twice about it. I watched it again as an adult after I bought kind of the Nightmare on Elm Street Blu-ray package, and there's a couple scenes where I was like, this is kind of an interesting movie, because there's quite a bit of like homoerotic subtext in it, and when it first came out, like, fans did not like this movie at all. And the documentary kind of follows the the legacy of the movie, and talks about why it maybe wasn't well received when it first came out. And also too, the actor Mark Patton in it, he at the time of course he still is an actor, but he was also kind of dealing with his own sexuality as well. And of course it turns out he is gay and everything. But the movie now, of course, follows, his career, why the movie is much more embraced today, and not just, it's not just celebrated in the LGBTQ community, but also it's a lot more the movie's a lot more being accepted by a lot more general horror fans as well. So while Nightmare on Elm Street 2 might not be the best one in the whole Freddy Krueger series, the documentary itself is quite well done and does take a look at the history of it, and it's an interesting documentary and definitely recommend to check it out. Caroline, how about you?
One that came to mind for me is the work of Vivek Shraya. She writes, in addition to music and art and performance and all kinds of different avenues, and often includes her own experiences as a jumping off for like nonfiction novellas. Almost, that's the wrong word, but there isn't really a word that really captures it, but looking at gender and relationships, racism, the experience of being a queer artist in Canada. I have such fondness for her zine, The Magnificent Malls of Edmonton, which I think I've talked about on the podcast before, and just love so much that there's this zine that celebrates the history of Edmonton's malls. I just love that. And her work since then has talked on everything from like death threats to I'm Afraid of Men, and recent book, Next Time There's a Pandemic, talking about the experience of living through this one, and maybe what you might do differently the next time. So Vivek Shraya has a number of things that I continue to really like checking out. So, heading into our roundtable questions, the first one is often what I do when we talk about characters: send them on a road trip. You and two fictional queer characters are going on a road trip. Who are you traveling with? Jones, I'll start with you.
One of them is fictional, one of them is not. But I decided I wanted to go on a road trip with Ennis Del Mar and Orville Peck, the musician, just because I want to go on a gay cowboy road trip. I think that should be allowed. I think that would be very fun.
Yeah. We've talked on the podcast in the past about the importance of music on a road trip.
Yeah, exactly.
So having a musician, a singer, an artist with you already, like, you're just ahead of the game. So
exactly, there we go.
Yeah.
Also, Orville Peck is playing Folk Fest this year, so maybe you'll go see him. I don't know. My friend is very excited about it.
Levi, how about you?
Well, I kind of want to change my answer now to include Adam Lambert, because I need some music also.
Yes. You can have 4 people on your road trip if you'd like.
This one was a really hard one for me, mostly because I get car sick in like 5 minutes. So any kind of road trip would be like, I don't even know how I would like withstand it. But if I could, if the car sickness wasn't an issue, I decided I might do Prince Chirp, who is the frog, and Goro, who is the snake, from Dungeon Critters, ignoring that they exist in a purely fantasy world where cars are not a thing.
You would have to do all the driving.
Yes.
Maybe though,
which would get us in trouble because I don't have my
Maybe
license.
though, it could be a road trip on horses, and then you don't have to worry about being car sick.
This is true. That would actually be a lot more fun, I think, riding on a horse.
We kind of cut you off there. Was there anything you wanted to explain?
Goro is very quiet but caring, looks out for his friends, the more level-headed one in the group. And then Prince Chirp is brave and adventurous and kind of a troublemaker, but not like always intentionally, and just always encourages her friends to face their foes. So I picked them kind of as more outgoing characters when I'm more around more outgoing people, I get a little more kind of confident and brave and outgoing myself. So I think being with some outgoing people would probably be good. Otherwise, it would just be kind of driving in the car and then going home and not trying all the things.
Great. Bryce, who are you riding with?
I'm gonna kind of steal from Jones, and I'm gonna put a real person in here. I'm gonna change my answer up just a little bit. First, my fictional character. I'm gonna go with Oscar from The Office, because I think Oscar would like keep us on schedule. Like obviously he's an accountant, and he would kind of make sure that we're on track and everything like that. So somebody who's also organized, I would need somebody like me there. And as far as like my real life person goes, I'm going to go with director John Waters. Big fan of his movies, kind of like a Serial Mom or Pink Flamingos. But I think he would have some awesome Hollywood stories to share. So I think you need a really good somebody there to kind of really keep the conversation going. So yeah, John Waters and Oscar from The Office are my picks.
Right. I just want to go back and clarify. So are you saying that you, on a road trip, you often take the role of like keeping people on schedule? Is that what you bring to the trip, or do you need to have someone do that?
A little bit of both if needed. Cheryl normally is pretty good with organizing, so I appreciate it. So yeah, if it's just me, John Waters, and Oscar, then somebody's got to be kind of that organizer a little bit there. So I need that backup.
Makes sense.
Yeah. How about you, Caroline?
Well, I got this idea in my head and couldn't shake it. So I'm going with two characters from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Rosa Diaz and Captain Holt. I think like we're gonna sit there in silence for a really long time, and I was like, that's not fun. But the more I thought about it, like the more ridiculous it got. And then I think there's gonna be a point where we all just let loose and have like the best time ever, even if it's a very specific type of fun. So I don't know. I hopefully would be in charge of the music, but then I could just see it getting shut down. So I love all of these trips. I want like books about all of them. Next question. If your life were a story, what genre would you want it to be? Levi, I'll start with you.
This question was also really hard for me. As a reader and a writer and also a movie and TV watcher, I am definitely drawn to darker characters and stories, often like horror and psychological thriller, but I absolutely do not want my personal life story to be anything like that. So I felt like probably science fiction would be my next one. I really like books that don't limit themselves on imagination when it comes to technology and what we can do to better ourselves, both as humans and to help the planet. And more recent science fiction titles also seem to be a bit more progressive when it comes to queer representation and inclusion, and being able to just kind of be yourself in a world that is healthy and thriving and supports everyone equally is definitely a story I would like to live in.
Jones.
I have two different options for this one. I would either like my life to be a fantasy, because that seems very fun, and I have this sort of ongoing story that I've been trying to write for many, many years now that doesn't seem to want to be written, but it's a fantasy, and so I'd like to explore that world a little bit more and hopefully get some more ideas maybe. Or I would like it to be a documentary about lichens, because then I can just talk about them forever.
I love it. I love that angle.
Yeah.
Bryce. Come on. I know it's got to be musical.
Yeah, I love musicals. I decided to go with, I know it's not a specific genre per se, but I kind of like the idea of like it being like a dark comedy. Kind of like, I'm a big fan of the show Curb Your Enthusiasm, and I kind of consider that to be a very dark comedy at times. So yeah, I just obviously play off real life stuff, but kind of with a little bit more of a twisted edge to it. So that'd be my genre. How about you, Caroline?
Film noir. do not know what that means for me. But we used to tease my grandmother because in her mind, she said that she always thought she looked like Veronica Lake with her hair kind of falling over her face and like the finger curls and things like that. And she didn't look like Veronica Lake, but now I kind of get it. So I want to be maybe that type of character, wear big hats and sunglasses and double
The
cross people.
like the femme fatale type.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's what I see. But then I also want a happily ever after, so that's not really compatible. So I'll have to think about it a bit more.
You just have to write your own film noir.
Yeah, yeah, I like this idea. I like it. Levi, Jones, thank you both so much for joining us today. I loved hearing about the characters and the items and the material that you talked about. My to read list is going to get so much longer after this, and I'm really excited for it. Is there anything coming up that you think our listeners would like to know about? Levi?
This is possibly a slight spoiler, but I am working with a few coworkers at the Meadows branch to make a very big Pride for 2023 at the Meadows branch. I don't want to give away too many details, and stuff might change since that's a year away, but we are hoping to do a very interactive exhibit with various components like scavenger hunts, QR codes, and matching games. We're hoping it'll cover a little bit of history, a little bit of the different identities and terms, pride flags, and more. And our aim is for it to be both fun and educational and for every age group.
Nice. I can't wait to hear more about that.
Yeah, that
really
sounds
great.
super interesting.
And Jones, is there anything you'd like to mention?
Yeah, mine is a little bit more recent, or soon, I guess. But this summer at Abbotsfield, we're having a Ukrainian dance workshop with the Jube School in person. And we're all very excited about that. So it's on July 5th from 2 to 3 p.m. So if you want to come try some Ukrainian dancing, come join us. Bring some water, bring some exercise clothes. It should be really, really fun.
Bryce.
Caroline, I've got a question.
Are you plugging anything today?
I am. I've got a question for you.
All right, I'm ready.
You know where I'm going with this.
I hope I do.
Why should kids get to have all the fun?
They shouldn't, is my answer.
I know. It's almost criminal in a way. But I do want to let everybody know, of course, we talked about this on our last episode. There's now a summer reading club for adults. We have the ones for kids, Summer Starts, but Summer Reads is all for adults and teens. So from June 25th to August 27th, both adults and teens can sign up for Summer Reads 22. Keep track of your reading this summer and complete some fun activities to have your name entered to win some great prizes, including gift cards to Edmonton businesses. And Caroline, you'll like this. We're giving away signed copies of books from a couple of past Overdue Finds guests, including John Douglas, who are giving away a signed copy of Mindhunter, and the fantastic The Sun Does Shine from Anthony Ray Hinton. So those are actually some of my favorite episodes in the past, so you can get their signed books by participating.
One of the, you mentioned part of Summer Reads is doing activities. One of the activities as an option is listening to the podcast. So if you're listening to this, you're already practically there.
Boom, done.
Yeah. If you are listening to this, we also hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't done so, we encourage you to hit the subscribe button so that you automatically get all of our new episodes. Please also leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, and more importantly, tell a friend about the show.
Yeah, and don't forget that we'll have a link to absolutely everything that we talked about in today's show notes. There's so many great titles to check out. And as we mentioned earlier, we would love to hear from our listeners. You can email us at podcasts@epl.ca, or you can reach us on Twitter @epl.ca and use the hashtag EPL Overdue Finds. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.